Hello and welcome to How I Hire. I'm your host, Roy Nodowitz, founder of an executive recruiting and leadership consulting firm called Nodo Group, where my team and I have spent the last decade helping to build iconic consumer brands one hire at a time. You can find us at nodogroup.com to learn more. You can also find and share this podcast on your favorite listening platform. I'm excited today to welcome Jan Singer. She's an influential and highly experienced CEO, having led top fashion brands such as Spanx, Victoria's Secret, and J. Crew. And the list goes on. Jan also served in key leadership roles at footwear giants like Nike and Reebok during her incredible career. And her resume also includes the likes of Chanel, Calvin Klein, and Prada Beauty. Throughout all these experiences, Jan and her team have driven amazing results and excelled in the retail and consumer space. She's here to share more about her career and leadership journey and her insight into hiring and building great teams. Jan, thank you so much for being here.
Roy, it's so good to be here with you. And I love this topic. And I love that you're doing this amazing service for everybody. So thanks for having me.
It's been really fun. And I know that you'll have lots of great things to share. So let's dive right in. Let's talk about your career journey up to this point in your life. What experiences have forged your leadership style and approach to building teams?
Well, I think, everything builds on each other. And so it even starts back, where I grew up. As we've talked about, one-on-one, Brockton is a city of champions and hard work and family, goes really deep. And, I think even starting back when I was raised in that amazing city in high school with 6,000 kids, I think you had to find your way to be a leader or you'd get lost. It doesn't matter even who you are. Like with 6,000 kids in your high school, you've got to find your own leadership identity. But through my career, I would say every role had different elements that I learned that I put in kind of my toolbox to be a great leader, and also things to not put in my toolbox, right? So as many things I witnessed or was a part of that don't work were as important as the things that did work. But I would say the most epic part of leadership for me, I had 20 years in New York, which was a deliver or die kind of a time at New York. And there was always somebody waiting in the doorway for your job, and everybody was disposable. I mean, I think I remember the chairman of one company I was at saying that in the media, like everybody's replaceable. I was like terrified, but that was the climate of New York. And then moving from the East Coast to the West Coast to Nike, that was a complete 180. Of course, Nike would deliver. They had great talent and great leadership and former athletes who knew how to play team. But what I really focused on there and was asked to focus on there was leadership itself, and I didn't, what do you mean leadership? I'm tall, I have a point of view, I'm a leader. Yeah, no, it meant like really understanding the fundamentals of what it was to be selfless and generous in your space and time, to create opportunities for others, to develop talent, to identify talent, to organize the team so people could grow, to embrace the diversity that drove innovation, to be generous in that way, to be an enterprise thinker and not just think about your job and your team, to understand the global impact of everything that we did and said we were going to do, to be a global economist in a leadership way as well, where to invest in materials and products for footwear and apparel. So my marching orders at Nike from the most amazing leader I ever had was just make it a great place to work. And people will make great products and the consumer will decide in the end, as they say there. So I think that was really the most pivotal contribution.
What were the experiences leading up to Nike and how did you get into the industry in the first place?
I spent the first 20 years actually in beauty, which I love because I actually started in the mall when I was 15 to be the demo girl, as they say. I sold, I think it was Revlon Pure Radiance powder that gave you a natural bronzing glow. And so I was that annoying girl at the escalator who would ask if you wanted to have a little touch of color. And I loved it. But I went from that to like the beauty industry, which I love because it gave you kind of hope in a jar. It was, everybody felt better at the beauty counter. And now men are learning like how fun that is. And
Yeah.
right? Everyone loves a little hope in that little bag with a piece of tissue paper. It's like nice. So I did that for 20 years. I loved it. Everything from Chanel, which was an amazing experience, to Unilever for Calvin Klein Cosmetics, where we rolled out fragrance for the first time in the Asia Pacific market, just culturally not acceptable to wear fragrance in public. And yet we launched CK1, which was the first fluid, genderless effort. And that was a long time ago, folks. That's not just a new thing. Then I went and worked for a small Italian company called Prada. They were at the time just making shoes and bags and a little fashion. And we were charged with launching their beauty company. And they were just the most generous, working for a founder like Miuccia Prada and her husband Bertelli, who only spoke Italian to us. We had to wear like the headphones from the UN. And he yelled a lot. He used to throw a lot of things, and he would get very dramatic. And it was like a movie all the time in Italian and blah, blah, blah. And then in the middle of like his big like speeches and the yelling and the throwing, he would look at you and be like, cafe, cafe, cafe. And everything would stop. And we would drink coffee. And it was the most incredibly civilized. The guy would come, literally a waiter with china and coffee, and not like, it was crazy. So we did amazing work with them, and creative team, and what a gift. So great. And then from Prada, 9/11 happened and I wanted to go home. I
Yep.
moved to Boston. I moved home, and what we love Boston, and what we love about Boston is what they stand for is, amazing higher ed, medicine, finance, like the center,
Yeah.
really strong industries. They're probably not so famous for consumer retail fashion. That's
Yeah.
okay. It's kind of like pilgrims up here. Like I love that part about my background, but it's not about excess. And so I didn't have a lot of choice. Like, TJ Maxx is great, Dunkin' Donuts, I don't know. But I knew the Reebok team, and I knew I was teaching spinning and aerobics in New York, sidebar. And I knew that, women, if I could feel the consumer favoring, women's businesses starting to really speak that way. And well, Reebok was one of the original it started as a women's sports brand. It was an
Yeah.
aerobic shoe, right?
Yeah.
So they wanted to get back to that. And I had a good vision for that. A strong vision, and I had a great team there. And I learned it was the first time I learned how to make products. I was always in brand marketing.
Right.
So I got into product creation on footwear, and gosh, it was quite a time there. They had the NFL, the NBA. Did you know they had Jay-Z and he had a shoe there?
No.
Yep. S. Carter, it was called. Shakira was a new act on the scene, and we did a shoe for her, and Mary J. Blige, and like all these assets. But I became a bit obsessed with Nike, because Reebok was ahead of Nike. Maybe when you were there, Roy, or before you. But there was a moment where Phil Knight had to have a town hall and let people go because they were
Yeah.
losing it to Reebok. You've heard that, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I was like, how did Reebok go from that position to Nike being dominant? And I was really a bit obsessed with that because I knew there were only 3 athletic footwear players fundamentally. And so what happened? Anyway, Nike called, and I was like, oh, now I can go find out, what really happened. I'm super curious about this. So I got from beauty to athletic fitness, sport that way. And then, by the way, beauty is engineered, as we talked about, and shoes are engineered. And that means you have IP and patents, and you are dealing with fit and feel and comfort. And so it's pretty scientific stuff. And I like that about products. So not everybody can make it. Went from a director with no reports to people placing bets on me, okay, we're going to give her some footwear business, and now we're going to give her the whole footwear business. And oh, by the way, now we want to win at apparel. Can you take the best of what we did in footwear and bring us industry experts in apparel? Like I went into Nike not as the head of footwear. I went in as a merchant with no direct reports and no budget, and a reduction in my title and my salary when I moved out west. But I went in because I was really that curious and passionate about Nike, about how they operated. I was willing to do whatever it took to get in. Like I didn't care. And I think they told me 10 times, you realize there's no direct reports to this role. I'm like, it's fine. Like I'm moving to Beaverton, Oregon, and I'm going to see if I can even fit in. I don't know. So I thought, number one, start with humility. And number two, along the same lines, as I kept getting more and more responsibility, and even when the first day I was there, I was never going to out footwear these guys. Never. Like if I was going to go in as the leader trying to tell these people what to do, that was never going to work. Never going to work. They have been there 25 years, some of these guys. They built the company.
Very strong culture, very strong way of doing things.
Exactly. And by the way, evidence of the size of the business says they were right. Very big business, very successful. So what was I going to do? Come in and tell them like, this is what you should do different. Yeah, no. So I think you come in with your hand on your heart and you come in humble, knowing it is an honor and a privilege to be at Nike, taking it all in and start to ask a lot of questions. I'm noticing that, I don't know, in women's footwear, this, and this. How do you think about that? And they would educate me, So the art of influence, the art of curiosity, humility, and through listening, finding in this complex machine what they thought their biggest obstacles were and making those a very simple plan, frankly, clearing a path so that they could solve their own problems. A good leader doesn't know everything. In fact, it's impossible to believe anyone can know everything at the pace in which we're working and the complexity.
Yeah.
So I knew the universe was setting me up for a moment of humility because there was no way. I mean, you had footwear guys that were there from day one, invented air.
Yeah. So let's talk about your time at Spanx, Victoria's Secret, and J. Crew. Those companies were going through various stages of growth, transformation, change while you were at the helm. They were CEO roles.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm curious, what stands out to you when you think about hiring or building teams at each of those companies?
All three were going through transformational work, which require a couple things. One, some deep understanding of where they've been and where they are. So listening and absorbing and that's not just of your team, of the whole organization, like being nosy, right? Talking to everybody, like, and listening to what's happening in it. And then secondly, it requires a deep, thoughtful understanding of consumers, where they're going, where you can take them, what they care about. And a vision comes from that and a plan. I always think about that. And then from there come how you organize a team to get after that vision. And then last but not ever least is, do you have the talent on the team? So it kind of is a repeatable model of like you are taking in, and also watching and listening and dreaming with your team, not alone. And then you ask yourself, are we set up to do this work? Do we have the structure and the budget, or how would I do that? And as you're doing that, you're getting to know your team and the organization, and you're asking, are people playing to their strengths? Do they have what they need? Can they develop into what they need to have? Are they in the right situation? I had a situation of a guy I knew I needed at Nike, and Nike apparel was also transformative. That was not a plug and play. That was a reset. And I knew there was a great apparel person within Nike, but currently sitting in a role that was more of I would say, a planning and allocation role. They were not doing well. I mean, they were frustrated. Business was frustrated, but they were just in the wrong box. So it's kind of also when you look at talent across the organization and across the industry, are people in their right lane,
Yeah.
And sometimes the person thinks they're in the right lane. And you have to have a real honest conversation about maybe a wider, stronger, longer lane with them and see if they'll go with you.
As a leader with so many people reporting into you in teams and functions, how do you get deep enough to really understand the individual and how they're doing, what they're capable of? And, if they are, how do you come to that understanding of whether or not they're in the right role or being fully utilized?
I think there's many ways to get to that. You have to like people and have a sense for human behavior, number one, because I think otherwise it becomes very technical or tactical, which isn't enough. There has to be a sensing side to this. So one part is, are you a good reader of people and behavior and humans? So question, if you're not, partner yourself with someone who is, by the way. So whether that's a coach or internally, it doesn't matter. And then it's about time and transparency. Not that you have to have forever, but situations that you set up, whether that's, meetings or dinners or discussions, to enable transparent conversations. And the transparent conversations don't have to be like, tell me your deepest secrets. It can be like, do you watch Bravo TV? I don't know. Like, what do you watch? Like, what are you watching and what are you reading? Just to find some common ground in which to have a very safe conversation. And I think that that's some people do that in sports. They play golf together. But it's like, can you find a safe space with somebody on common ground in which to have a normal, transparent conversation? And from there, can you build trust or insights about what's happening? That's one. The second is very tactical, which is what are the goals that you've both agreed are needed to be done? And if you've negotiated, how you're going to get there, is it happening or not? And if it's not happening, why? Are they miscast? Are they overloaded? Are they missing some skills to develop? Versus like, okay, this person's no good. You really have to think about it from multiple angles. Do I have a different, better role for this person's talent where I think they would be able to be stronger for us? So you kind of make it your business to find common ground and a safe space in which to have an authentic dialogue about whatever. And then you understand what they've been asked to do and what they're doing and see if that adds up. And I do that with my team, but then I trust that my team is doing that with their team. And I firmly also believe in a lot of talent calibration and conversation, and calibrating. I will listen and solicit for input, like help me understand this person's been sitting in this job for 10 years and they're not advancing. What's happening?
Let's talk a little bit about, bringing talent in from the outside
Yeah.
and what types of experiences or thoughts you have around doing that successfully.
Well, I think the first thing to think about is when you're being recruited, actually, and it's hard to think this way, but you have to, is that it's just not all about you in that moment. I know, like, and I go through this, like, oh gosh, I really hope they're focused on, what I can do and what I can bring, and I can do this job and I can have this job. However, it's not just like looking for the right talent. It's also the competency, right? It's also the chemistry with the team. So sometimes it's going to be required that the team doesn't have large enterprise thinking. So bringing somebody in from a large enterprise is going to be valuable. But then it's your responsibility, if you're bringing them into small, to onboard them and get them calibrated and understanding what they're walking into. Same in reverse. Sometimes, a big company requires the fidelity or hands-on or entrepreneurship of a smaller company experience. But then you've got to get that person prepared and your team prepared. And I always tell my team, and I really mean this, the success or failure of the person joining isn't the person's responsibility alone. A high performing team feels authentically responsible for each other's success or failure. So, what are you going to do? Are you going to decide that this person's going to win, or have you decided already that they're out? I look at my team, I'm like, hey, that's on you. Like, you all make that decision.
When you're thinking about integrating people into your team, are there things that you learn in the interview process or sort of things that you start thinking about to make sure to set them up for success once they come in?
Yeah, I think that's part of the process, even as I calibrate with others that have interviewed them. What are the development opportunities? That doesn't mean like they have gaps, it just means tools they're going to need. So, what are the development opportunities, are the one big question that we have. And are we willing to take a bet on that question? Do we have the support or skills or tolerance to take that on? I know some of the team might say, we can't take it on right now. We just took on somebody else like this, and it's a lot of energy to get them up to speed. Okay, well, then I have to hear my team.
Yeah.
I've had teams, it's so foreign that they feel like organ rejection if you brought them in, but I will ask them, hey, I see something here and I really would like to take a bet on it, but I'm going to need your decision that this person's going to be successful. Do I have your commitment? And if it's a yes, then we go, and it changes the dynamic. If I have a no, then I have to hear them, hey, we can't do it right now. Here's all the reasons.
Right.
I have to also hear that.
Right. What do you think makes someone an authentic leader? What do you look for when you're evaluating leaders?
I think that I have a gift or a curse to be able to smell when people are dancing, if you will, if people are kind of selling me. I can feel it. I don't like it. I much rather hear, and of course we love good news, and I really love bad news. I don't like no news, and I don't like fake news. Just don't. Just tell me. Again, problem solver. I really can do well with bad news. Hey, this happened in my last job. It didn't go well, but here's my take on it, and here's what I learned. Here's what I'd like to work on in this job. That's all okay for me, because I'm not just going to listen to this person who I'm interviewing. I'm also going to talk to my team who's probably met them. I'm going to talk to people they've worked with. I'm going to talk to people they want me to and people they don't want me to, if it's a pretty senior person, just like people do with me. It's what we do. It's not just one interview or one meeting that determines a hire. It takes a village of people.
That's a great segue to the sequence or method for how you get to know candidates in the hiring process. Do you have a way that you approach interviewing or evaluating candidates in that hiring process whether you're looking internally or externally within the organization?
I don't have a formula. I was thinking about that. I don't. The approach depends on the role, the situation in the company, and the candidate, if there's a candidate. For instance, if I have to hire a CFO, I don't know, head of planning, I am going to tap into leaders on my team who have come through that pipeline. Or if I have access, other people in that pipeline on a senior level at, let's say it's an enterprise and there's other companies first. Let them take the first cut at this, because the functional competency of that role is not my core. It's not how I grew up. So sometimes it's, let me see if I can get a pool of functionally capable, competent candidates. And then I'll work the chemistry side with the team, myself, the culture. So I leverage the team, or it could be where I grew up, product and marketing. And there are certain people on the team there's always different interviewers. And some people you will have one or two or three or maybe more interviewers who really get into the nits and dits. Like there's a few that I know who are more detailed interviewers. And so I balance my kind of general getting to know this person and their history and how I feel about them and what I know about them with some tactical blocking and tackling questions that I know some of my more detailed interviewers will interview. And I'll also do that with a couple people so I can triangulate to see if there's a pattern. Did you say that? Did three people? You know what I mean? And not just leave it up to one person in one meeting.
Okay, that makes sense.
It's a process, and it varies depending on the person and the role.
Is there like a favorite question or questions in your arsenal of interview questions?
I don't think so. Not something I go back to the well on all the time. It really depends on what I'm fishing for and what I'm trying to learn. I'd say my strength in the process is around more of the leadership identity, the chemistry with the team, the gaps in the competency I know I have on my team that I'm trying to fill. So I'm listening for that. And the reason why I don't have a routine is that it's interesting, even trying to avoid any unconscious bias on my team or with myself, to make sure that I do have multiple points of view so that I can triangulate. I do think it's important that it's not formulaic for that reason, because you can get into a rut a bit.
So do you believe or subscribe to the belief that there's no such thing as a perfect candidate, that everyone coming in is going to have elements that are going to need to be developed or leadership growth opportunities, and that it's your responsibility, is what you're saying, to support that? Yeah.
Yeah. There is no perfect candidate and there's no perfect job. By the way, let's talk about that. There's a tax to pay with every job you interview for. Big tax sometimes, but there's no perfect job. That's why I do think timing is so pivotal. And you could ask, so how do you know what's the right time? You don't sometimes know. You don't know that you're going to run into a pandemic, or you don't know that you're going to run into a sale of a company. You don't know.
I do like how, generally speaking, I think the concept of inclusion and diversity and equity, and also just sort of relocation and remote working, I think it's opened up companies to a much broader pool of talent and possibilities, where we're seeing lots of different profiles getting more, companies are more open to looking at diversity within the talent pool, because individuals are unique, teams are diverse. So, but they're looking at, I think, more array of unique individuals for each job, which I think is a really good thing.
Yeah, and it's a balance. I mean, I think for the sake of the talent pool, you want them set up for success, and the business has to set up for success. And if you don't have diversity, my son and I were talking about this the other day. It's so comfortable and fun to be with people just like you, and that's great because it's shorthand and it moves fast, and maybe you see jokes the same way, but it's kind of boring after like about 5 minutes. So you don't get to problem solving with people giving the same answer around the table.
We've talked about your belief in driving meaningful growth for brands and how that's tied to innovation. How did this factor into your approach to recruiting and hiring?
It's everything in the recruiting and hiring. It's a conscious effort. Because again, I say this, I was talking again to another friend who's hiring a COO, and she said, "Oh, I love this woman. We clicked, we get along, we have the same vision, the same chemistry." And I said, "Has she ever operated it? Has she ever like literally run the process?" "No, but I love her." Yeah, well, that's because you're hiring yourself. So that's redundant. You have to use a muscle that's not muscle memory to really push towards what the business needs and the team needs, and not what's easy. And so it factors in because I really, if I'm working with a search firm, it's an absolute requirement that the slate be diverse. And sometimes I'll give like numbers, like I want 80% of people of diversity in this space because I'm already balanced over here on this side. Like I gotta balance this out. Or I have, and sometimes it's diverse experience. Like I have 8 people with footwear experience. Give me somebody with apparel on this team so I can balance out. Here's why, all the competencies. And in design, especially, I think there's a magic to the mix. It used to be, designers, industrial designers, graphic designers, and apparel designers are not trained the same way. And, they would stay and get hired for their competency, but they're all vision and they're all creative and they all have incredible inspiration. So if you can make the mix right, I mean, look, we're seeing mashups in product collaborations for the last 10 years. There's no difference when you're hiring teams. So diversity is not a statistic.
Right.
It's not an initiative. It's not a quota. It's what you need to make the mix on your team magical. And that's what drives growth. And there's amazing conversations and sometimes the funniest innovation and mistakes and laughter, and makes a great place to work, doesn't it?
So, what advice do you have for aspiring leaders?
I think, first of all, you're already leading. I don't know about aspiring or non aspiring, but I take your point. You mean on a senior level. But first, assume leadership from day one in whatever job you have. And I don't mean assume control, it's different. Assume leadership, as in the things we talked about, bringing optimism to the table, bringing energy to the table, thinking beyond your job, thinking global, in thinking generously. Assume leadership and selflessness in that way from day one. Doesn't mean you have to be the boss, because by the way, even as CEO, you're not the boss. This just in, newsflash. You always have, I have a boss, everybody has a boss. I don't know who doesn't have a boss. Maybe Jeff Bezos, he has a boss, he has a board. I don't know. We all answer to somebody. So don't assume leadership means the boss. It just means being that North Star of vision, of energy, of optimism, of maybe influence, sometimes answers, engagement, inclusion. Be a leader from the beginning. And when you do that, people gravitate towards which they get answers or energy or recognition. And you'll see if people are gravitating to follow you, you have reached some sort of traction. If they're not, take a breath and ask for feedback, ask for help.
I'm curious what you're thinking about post-pandemic, the world of work and team culture and norms and leadership, and how that's going to be different moving forward. What are your thoughts about how things are taking shape now?
Well, I think about a couple of things about this pandemic the whole time, staring out the window like everybody with my screen. I wonder what will stick. Like that was always in my head. What will this mean? And I think, what I noticed is even before COVID, purpose, like, why do I come here? Why do I come to this place? Why should I get out of bed? They come for recognition, achievement. They come to make this place a better world. Like people used to be, you come to work to get paid and you punch your card and I'll do whatever you tell me to do as long as you pay me, right?
Right.
Well, not enough. It has to be about so much more. So I think that's going to change, how we work, go back, don't go back, part-time, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm sure glad I don't have to decide. I'm just going to watch it and then weigh in after and figure out if I were leading, next, what I do. And then you said it, earlier, the most palpable change prior to COVID and COVID exaggerated is just listening from the bottom up versus the top down versus directing from the top down, whether it's at a customer or an associate at the most, entry level, their voice is amplified, it matters, and it better be listened to. And you got to listen to it. So I think that's really important engagement. So as a leader, what does it mean? You have to embrace innovation. And if you want to grow, this country must innovate their way out of this situation, climate change, whatever we're facing, social injustice. So that requires, as we said in the beginning, diverse voices, diversity, equity, inclusion. It's not a fad. It's not something that just came up. It's what's always been the fuel, always behind problem solving and innovation. So that I can't emphasize that enough. And then two of the things that I think as leaders, we have to really just realize I'm grateful for needing to happen, which is one, got to be more heart than head. You really have to we as leaders have to put our hands on our heart and hear and feel and be exactly where your team is, especially in this moment.
Yeah.
You just have, I've had one guy who's like, why do we have to talk about this? It's not political. This is what they want to talk about. So we're going to talk about it. Like, let them decide, use your heart. And then last but not least, I would say is, while all this technology is happening and information, content, who owns the news, I think it's super important to be data informed, but not data directed. It can be informed by the data, but if you don't use your head, your logic, your gut, your intuition, even as product merchant people, if you're just going to use your algorithm, we're going to get faster horses. We're not going to move forward as a company, as a nation, as a civilization. We're not going to move forward if you're just going to read the algorithm or let the machine do the work entirely. We're humans. We must embrace art and the creativity that goes with it and the risk taking, or we're going to have faster horses. And that's not good. I like change. It energizes me. I really do love change. And I find this time, even though human suffering aside, of course, it's hideous and horrible and tragic for any level. And I know that progress is super important for everybody. Like, I think when you look at Nike, and I go back to them because, again, just the epitome of delivering, or even Apple, you have to be willing to obsolete yourself, even as a leader. You got to be willing to obsolete. You got to hire people so much smarter than yourself every day.
Yeah.
And hope that they'll take your job.
Yeah. How are you thinking about the future? Are there any exciting projects that you have on the horizon?
Yeah, it's been actually a really cool year. I'd say almost a year. I've been doing a ton of consulting, which I love, with big consumer retail and small VC, late stage VC. It's interesting to take that time to realize that what you've learned has value to those coming up. It's kind of like this recognition that the sun rises and sets every day, and we do age, we get older. So I guess we get wiser. We hopefully get wiser. And there's another group of people starting. It sounds so obvious, but you kind of get to this place and you're like, oh, it continues. And so these people that are coming up, as you've asked me to do this, they ask for ideas and observations and insights and intelligence, and I'm happy to provide it. So that's been fun. And then I hopefully, knock on wood, I'm on the final mile of a public board seat, which I appreciate because it has formality and governance, and in the spirit of everybody has a boss, the board works as a collective to represent the shareholder value and to be that strategic sounding board for the CEO. And that's a great honor. I hope that I'll have news about that soon. Yeah. And then I've invested in a couple things. So will I operate again? Maybe, but it can be something kind of nifty, growthy with, again, diverse teams and innovation. And that would be a privilege to do again. And I might. So I'm trying to stay loose, Roy, until the dust settles in this crazy moment we're in, you know?
Yeah. It's an interesting and exciting time right now. It really is. And I'm sure you have endless opportunities coming your way, and you will continue to have that, and be excited to see, the types of things that you're involved with moving forward. I really appreciate you being on the podcast today. Thank you so much, and look forward to talking to you soon.
Thank you, Roy. Same here.
Thanks for tuning in to How I Hire. Visit howihire.com for more details on the show. How I Hire is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon, and all major listening platforms. How I Hire is created by Noto Group Executive Search. To find out more about Noto Group, visit notogroup.com and follow us on LinkedIn. This podcast was produced by A.O. McLean, LLC. To learn more about their great work, visit aomclean.com.